Hi, everyone.
Hello,
Welcome
everybody.
Hello,
to
everybody.
Mastering Complex Scheduling.
Those are some quick joins.
Yeah,
John,
filling
Suzette,
up fast.
Callie in fast. We
Thanks for
love to see
joining,
it.
everyone. We're excited to take you through our Mastering Complex Scheduling part one of our new webinar series. We'll give everyone a minute to join, and while we're doing that, we've got a little quiz for you.
Absolutely.
So while we wait for a few more to join, feel free to pop in the chat what you think is who was the Australian university which was the first to admit women to full academic status, granting them equal educational rights to men in 1881.
No Googling.
This
We're
this
all
is a
about the
good
honor.
good question.
Yes, very much a good question.
We could see some
See some
Adicade,
answers.
Kelly. Not sure whether
Hey, that
Adelaide.
gets points. That gets points.
That's yeah. Spelling is not counted.
No, no, we're good with that. I reckon we give it a couple of
A, so we get
moments.
a couple of votes for Tassie as well. That's the A's. Oh,
Yeah,
there's an extra option E, all of the above.
yeah. I see Timothy trying to be strategic there. Well played, but you don't get bonus points, my friend. All right, we
Give
might give it another
everyone,
30 seconds or so.
No
yep,
one's voting for
perfect.
Sydney.
For Sydney.
My alma mater. It's the greatest city in the known universe, Jordan. Never forget.
Your bias is showing, Paddy.
I am biased, of course.
It's healthy bias, though. All right.
Drum roll.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yep,
Yeah, University of Adelaide. Well played.
very good.
All right. Now, just to crack us off, I think Bob will do some introductions, but I do want to point out the idea of that quiz question is not lost on us. You've got the boys for today. Bob, would you like to give us a bit of a round?
Yep. Hi from the team today. You probably all know us by now, but just a quick around the room. My name's Bob. I'm a BDM for the ANZ region. We've got Joel, our commercial director, Patrick, our chat master, and Jordan, who's driving the demo today.
Thanks, Bob. Lovely.
And yeah,
We
of
do really
course,
love
you know the
interaction too.
drill. If you do have any questions, pop them in the chat. We love the interaction. So you're all very good at that anyway. But yeah, feel free to shoot any questions you have or comments in the chat as we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Agenda for today, just a quick recap for everyone that's here. We're going to share stories, 3 stories to share. We're going to look into medical scheduling at the University of Melbourne, dentistry scheduling at the University of Melbourne, and nursing and allied health scheduling at ACU. And then we're just going to have a recap of it one last time. So we're going to move quickly through this to get into the system. Jordan.
Absolutely. So we'll start
Perfect.
with those 3 stories, eh?
Great. But before we do, you knew this was coming, anyone that's been to one of ours. We'd love just a bit of interaction. So into the chat now, if you could answer some questions for us, is what's the toughest scheduling context at your university? And then probably another side of that you can answer in the same response. Do you or your team handle it, or is it handled by the schools? So what is the toughest and most complicated scheduling that you do? And is it responsible for you centrally, or are you part of the school and it's done in the schools?
Absolutely. And just while everyone tippy taps away, we just want to call out we have had, obviously, here we've got some stories from the University of Melbourne and ACU, and we're super, super grateful for the teams there, particularly Martin and Aidan, who shared lots of rich information with us. Obviously, we're involved too, but we've got lots of information to share with you. That's thanks to them. So thanks
Yeah.
very much, guys, and extended
Great
teams.
call. Great call. Agree. Awesome. So why are we here? I guess probably the first bit to start, we started with the state of scheduling last year, and we'll do that annually. And one of the things that came up is the middle one is, sharing knowledge within the community, being able to share some of the work that's been done and best practice, and just connecting the community even further. I know that in Australia and New Zealand, it's really well connected, but just including and fostering that. So this is hopefully the first of many of that for prospects and time edit customers and everyone else that wants to be part of it. The other piece of feedback that we regularly hear as we speak to different people out in scheduling land is that we want to understand in detail how do you do it and who does it. So hopefully this gives us a bit of detail around that, and it also gives you the agency to go and reach out or ask us for contacts to ask them how do they do it and what's the benefit of it.
Absolutely.
And this is a new series. I guess we're going to look into some of the complex things that we as time edit gets super excited by. I know that when we bring these sort of solutions back and share them, the team in Australia and New Zealand, the team globally gets super excited to say, oh yeah, that's a great way of doing it. So this is a chance to share some of that as well, that we really love in the series form in a number of different webinars that we'll host.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Two small pieces. One, thank you, chat. It is popping off. We'd love to see all this, seeing lots of excitement for the things we're going to see today. So everyone keep your eyes peeled. And also we've got lots of things that we can talk about later for next time. Second piece as well, those that might have seen us speak for sort of practitioners in the room at stands or in other places, another piece that's come of the state of scheduling that we talked about, little selfishly for the scheduling side of things, is raising the profile of schedulers who are doing a really great job with really, really tough cases. And you guys are outlining these tough cases. We think that's also a really big fun part of today, is to celebrate where we think some really innovative solutions have been put forward by some clever teams. So without further ado, Joel, shall we?
Yes. So we'll dive into this in more detail, but we thought we'd just call it out to start with. I guess what we're going to talk at today and what we're going to look at are three key parts of Time Minute. The first one being a concept we call membership, which enables some of this. The second one being reservation templates. So the fact that we can customize different things depending on what we want to be in a reservation. And the third one being individual reservations. So not tied to a week pattern as far as their individual reservations themselves, but they can be grouped together and can still have the best parts of a week pattern in the fact that they can move all in unison, they can be scheduled all in unison, and they can obviously save you time. So these are the three concepts we're going to spend a fair bit of time in today, but we just thought we'd call them out to start with. This is sort of some of the enabling factors that we have within Time Edit that can help and that allow these cool problems to be solved.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So our stories for today, I'm not going to go into too much detail around it, but we thought just setting the scene of each of them. So medical scheduling at University of Melbourne is decentralized. They used a different system. So as part of the project, it was about bringing them together to use one system altogether. And then the second is dentistry, which also used a different system and sort of has its own requirements, which again, we'll dive into more detail. So being able to look at that. And lastly, nursing and allied scheduling at ACU, a really interesting one that we moved quickly on, but it was a really fun sort of learning. Again, we've done nursing a couple of times, a different way of doing it. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Joel.
Fine.
Got to do it once per webinar, right? As we jump in, just looking at the excitement levels, I'm seeing a lot of medicine, a lot of dentistry. So let's talk about that. But one thing to call out is that Joel's just outlined three key features: membership, individual reservations, and reservation templates. But the benefit of each of these is actually present across all of the stories. There's just a particular thing we want to call out in each of them. So jumping into the first, it's medicine scheduling at the University of Melbourne. So once again, massive thanks to Martin for sharing some of his experiences around medicine and dentistry and how the University of Melbourne are solving for these things using Time Edit. So jumping on in. Joel, bit of a recap.
Yeah, awesome.
You're deeply involved in this, hey?
Not as deeply as some, but I did spend a bit of time and some sleepless nights over it. So I guess probably the first piece to start of, they had a really strong expert within the faculty who was about going out and understanding the requirements for each. I'm not gonna say anything new. It's highly complex. It's got various and competing pressures with external staff, with central resources, with changes at the last minute, and all of that. they do a lot of that scheduling within the department themselves or the school themselves. So the fact is that, you know, they've got a lot of agency on how they schedule. Uh, although although it's the same or similar in each, it's done differently, which is another story that we hear. So, and then obviously that change of the fact of makeup sessions are required, changes at the last minute are required. So what Claire was able to do is really understand what are the commonalities of the requirements that they had. And then what we brought from a time edit perspective is this was one of the times we thought, I will fly someone down from Sweden who's done this before with Karolinska Institute and other institutes that are medical institutes within Europe to really bring that best practice and harness that within the region. So what we were able to do then is really focus on delivering this independent of sort of the central scheduling team and what they were doing, but with their input as so we could standardize as much as possible. So for us, a really exciting one. And what we do regularly at Time Edit is bring down people or bring down experts depending on projects or depending on, I guess, the knowledge that we need to be able to draw upon.
Absolutely. So jumping into the feature that we're talking about here, again, for time edit experts in the room, none of this is going to be particularly breaking in the feature side of things, but maybe seeing how it's used might be interesting to you. For those that are not familiar with time edit, let's see how you feel by the end. So the first of these three ideas is memberships. Really, at its core, it's just being able to create groups of stuff and having an object in that group or objects in that group being represented by that group. So wherever the group is, say it's group 1, then all of the students in that group are also considered to be there as well. It's like a placeholder for a lot of things at once. But we can get really, really comprehensive with it. It gives you another element of clash control alongside, you know, rooms and resources and program structures and people. But it also allows you to have things like nested structures. So in a little screenshot we see up here, which is part of what we're going to dive into, this is actually from Melbourne's Dentistry piece. So as I said, goes across lots of stories. There is the ability for you to nest groups, have a level 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, so that you can have a really comprehensive structure for how granular you want to get with how you want students represented in that timetable, while still making it as easy as possible to handle them in bulk. And they, again, obviously enforce clash control. But talking about it from a scalability perspective, it's also able to be done in an automated basis through things like integrations, through our integration with our allocate piece. So where students are being sorted into groups and so on, it leverages this same functionality. That is memberships. So jumping into the memberships concept, we're going to have a little bit of a look at this timetable. So this is one piece of a medicine timetable. Before we dig too deep in, let's just have a look at what a nested structure might look like with a really simple example so that we can consume this one and make sure we understand it, because this is complex scheduling. These are going to be really rich examples today. So if we have a big group like this one, we might have Susie, Kate, and Zara in that group. Those are 3 members of that group. Then we might have some subgroups that are nested into it. One with Susie, one with Kate, one with Zara. That might go on each of the different tracks, but they might all go into the lecture. Nice and clear so far. That's a really simple one. But in medicine, the complexity often comes from things like this. If this workshop is actually a practical with a cardiologist who's just been called across to deal with a major heart surgery that's popped up out of nowhere, that class is not going ahead. We need to find a way to either move that class, find another person, arrange it in some way so that Susie doesn't miss out, because that's a hurdle requirement for Susie to complete that particular practical. There's not really an option just to skip this. In this example, of course, maybe there is in the real world. But what we have with memberships is not an instant solution to that problem. What we have is the ability to visualize holistically a student's timetable, all potential classes for that at different levels, and be able to find a spot that we can put them into. Similarly, because we're working from one central database, we'll talk about this in the later examples, things like external staff, so this surgeon, for example, we can have their availability or unavailability overlaid into this to be able to see all these constraints centrally. So let's jump back into our complex example that we were looking at here, and we can see a timetable. And we're going to deal with this student here today, this student with this student number. We're not going to give them a name today, just to make it nice and easy, but we can see the interface here. I've got some blue boxes. This is their clinical placement. And if I click on any one of these, I can see that this clinical placement has that student on it directly. That's how I get that student having an element of class control, and that's how it shows up on their timetable. But the other things in this view are also things that that student is on. If I click on this one, this is a physical examination, practical that they're a part of with other students. And naturally, when I click on that, it shows me all of the other students here. So if, for example, this was cancelled and I needed to see where I could move it to, now I'm seeing where I could move it to with all of the other students' clash visualizations for as well. Similarly, if I go back to our original view, I see here I have a couple of groups. These are the student group that that student's part of. They're a member of this group, and that's how the clash control's enforced for these ones. So if I click on this one here, I can see there's no students directly on it. It's just the group. So this is part of a recurring structure, or it's been able to be handled at a group level, not having to do individual students. And of course, I can see the members of that group if I drill down into it. Similarly, here, I've got an approach to clinical practice with lots of groups, and then an individual student who's been put on it. Again, giving full flexibility as to how we want to handle this. If a student has to this elsewhere or needs to take this as a makeup, this might be where Susie gets dropped into. She gets directly put onto this because this fit her timetable alongside the rest of the students who already planned to be on it. And it gives multiple ways of handling students at an individual basis. Now, we're going to talk about how this can happen outside of the typical constraints of week patterns a little later in here. So if that is playing on your mind as a season scheduler, just hold tight on that basis. But, Joel, that's our medicine example. Obviously, happy to take...
we pause here and see if there's any questions. I think one of the interesting things that when we've done some reviewing on it and looked at it is that this can work for any type of makeup, meeting, anything that student needs to do. So, it can have the coursework, the placements, but can have other things that we need in the schedule that needs to be scheduled centrally or, needs to show up on the student's timetable. So really no limitations, I guess, Jordan, from here, apart from, do you want it in the student's timetable and how do you want to reflect that?
Yeah, exactly. And for those that were paying really, really close attention, you'll notice when we looked at the clinical placements, that student was individually represented on the clinical placements, whereas the student was represented as a group or part of a group on these ones. And we have placements and teaching in the same system because we have the flexibility of how we handle these student groupings. And the student gets this stuff in their timetable because of their individual student object, which is represented in some way, whether it's directly or part of a membership, same gig. So we're not limited then that if the student is in one student group and the activity outside of that student group, originally, they won't see it on their timetable. That sort of thing doesn't happen in our world. But moving on from here, again, as Joel said, any questions, please feel free to pop them in. We will certainly stop toward the end for a proper grilling for those that are really keen on digging in. We love that. But we're going to jump into dentistry because that was also
Jordan
really
will
highly requested.
handball off to the Uni Melbourne team and to Martin because sometimes it's better them talking at it. But we'll give it a crack first. Okay,
that's
dentistry.
rough.
Here we go. Can you apply different titles, e.g. for clinics for each week, Jordan?
Yes, Suzette, that's a great question. So you may have noticed, thank you. I love to get into these things. Suzette, you may have noticed when I clicked on here, it says long case. This is actually the title of that specific activity. When I click on this one or hover over it, this one specifically is an approach to clinical practice. And when the student sees this in their title, this title field will show up for the student so they know specifically what they will be going to do. Of course.
And this can happen, Jordan, at an individual level, at a week pattern level. It can happen in any different way that we want it to. And we're seeing internal data, external data might be different to that as well, mightn't it?
Exactly. And the Unimelb team actually have a little more richness in their real world examples. They have the name of the expert practitioner in there as well. So I know that if I'm going to approach to clinical practice with Dr. Zanotta, I know that I go to Dr. Zanotta's office in the emergency room on level 3 and so on. Yeah.
Thanks.
Got a ring to it.
It does, doesn't it? Thanks, Bob.
Get off it, boys. All right. Dentistry.
Awesome. Dentistry. So I guess dentistry, to call it out, probably the first bit, very similar challenges to medicine with the way that they need to manage students from individual to grouping to different layering, contextualizing of it. But probably the interesting bit, and this is definitely one where when we saw it the first time, we all went, wow, look at this, is the fact that we've got specialist spaces and resources that we need to draw down on. And in an ideal world, therefore be able to report on them and have a look at them based on utilization, etc. So a really cool use case that is quite similar, but different and unique in itself.
Very much so. Absolutely. So if we jump across from here now into the key piece for this story, reservation templates. So this is really the underlying set of rules for what we say is a valid reservation, a valid thing we schedule in any given context. And we tie that to what we call a mode. And the modes are the things that people can select from. So in the little screenshots I have down the bottom here, I've got a little down box, and this is a reservation mode for dentistry. This is one for medicine. And we can have, one or more of these rule sets, these templates pointing to a mode. The modes.
Sorry, Jordan, are we
Yeah.
meant to be seeing your time edit screen? Or the
Oh,
slide?
most certainly you are. Sorry, Pat.
Gotcha.
Thank you kindly. For everyone, this is an explanation of reservation templates where we can see some examples of this. So the dentistry one on the left, as you can see, has chairs involved because that's part of the reservation template. That's a valid thing that could be on a dentistry reservation. And the mode controls this. Similarly, when I'm in the medical scheduling mode, I can't see chairs because they're irrelevant to medical scheduling. I can't see car spots or hot desks. These aren't things that we use for medical scheduling, but they're things that might be in other modes on other templates. And this is how we're able to have all of that nuance that we're talking about in a single system and have people access only what's relevant to them and handle what's relevant to them. Now, dentistry being a tough nut to crack generally, because it's got some specialist spaces that get used in a particular way and have particular rules, like time rules. My chairs should only be available when I have people who are coming through for clinical hours to fill those, and they come through at specific times. And so these rules might be part of my reservation template. So all of the management of this stuff is automated in that respect.
Jordan, can I just ask a quick question?
Please.
Abstractly, it's the chairs that we've seen a couple about vet science and animal reservations. Is this applicable to vet science as well for the vet science animals? Short answer.
Yes. So for those that were in the vet science piece, I don't want to go the early crow too much on this. We'll come back to vet science later, but I will say that chairs and, for example, animals that are used for rotating like OSCE exams, very similar concept. They're in our system, a resource is a resource is a resource until you start applying constraints and rules to it. And you can have anything as a resource. People can be resources. I can have a teacher and give them office hours, and that's a resource. And they can act like these chairs do. Of course, people are not resources in that respect, but from a data perspective, you get where I'm going. So that's how we have that flexibility. We start from a really base piece and then start building that on top. Yeah, Ingrid, easy one to answer. Yeah, you could do. You could apply this stuff to hot desks if you wanted to. But that's something that we could explore a little later toward the end if you're okay with that. What I want to do is jump into now an example of an interface that is very, very closely modeled on what the University of Melbourne are currently doing with dentistry. So we have, as we see here, a list of things in our reservation mode that includes chairs. And in my interface, I have constant visibility both of all the things that I would usually be concerned with my booking, like when is it, which student groups, where is it, who's teaching it, what subject, all the fun stuff. And obviously class visualization on all of those bases. So I know I can put it where it needs to be. But when I'm looking at it, I also see specifically which chairs am I using at what times for this particular one. And then for any other reservation, which chairs, what times, and so on. Obviously, that makes the actual management of dentistry much easier. As we jump into the live interface, we can have a little bit of a look at this. That makes the actual management of dentistry much easier. As you can see, I've got a whole list of chairs and so on this reservation that you can see specifically which ones are being used. And because I've got visibility across multiple interfaces, when I click this one, I see that these are the chairs that are concerned with that particular reservation. And if I wanted to change those chairs, all I need to do is grab one of them and I can see where I could put a different chair, for example. I can move that chair to be chair 48 or chair 50 or whatever I might choose to do. But I can see which chairs are or are not being used at any given time. Those that were at our reporting webinar will know then that this gives you robust utilization data that you can use to report on utilization of spaces and these sorts of things. So taking this to something like clinical labs, equipment, and these sorts of things that even in a nursing or allied health context as well, you know which spaces are being used, for what, how frequently, and so on, so that you can justify spend. So really, really critical data. But in terms of actually scheduling the dentistry stuff, because you have constant visibility of everything together, including all the things we just saw from medicine around student groups, it's really easy to schedule it and to bring in then any sort of variable, chairs, external spaces, and the like. But if we dive a little deeper into the student group that we use here, again, just to talk about things going across different levels, this group that we see has 4 students in it directly, but this is a nested student group. This group is actually 1 level down. All of the students are part of this rotation, and there's clash control being applied so that students part of the same rotation aren't clashing. We then see the clash control for this specific group, and within that group, we've got subgroupings that can be managed for the students within that group. And in this case, it ties 1-to-1, but of course, it doesn't have to be 1-to-1. It's not like managing single student sets or anything. It's just as many students as you'd like to bulk together to make things as easy as possible that you can then manage. And again, reiterating, this is something that can be managed via our allocate piece. So if students are being sorted into or choosing class groups and things through our allocate piece, that can be done via integration with third-party pieces, student systems and others is quite common. So lots of different pieces. Celeste, your question there. Chairs can be assigned to an individual activity. Yes. Can you add the individual students within a group on the activity to a specific chair within the activity? My goodness, that's a great question. In this particular structure, I don't believe we have that level of specificity in this example. We might need to explore with you and come back on that. But I don't see necessarily an issue there. We'd have to come back to you on exactly how that's best done.
That's an interesting one because I can my mind automatically goes to some solutions, but let's not do it here as we always want to, Jordan.
Yeah,
let's go.
I want to, but it's like
Yeah.
I could have 12 students in 12 rooms, the rooms chairs, and then distribute them through. And yeah, we could do it that way. Celeste, you've got me ticking. Let's come back to that. Carolyn, that is just my configuration. If you look at this one here in particular, I'll have the chairs in orders and so on. That's just the way that my configuration goes. Great question, though. You picked that up. So did Joel this morning. All right. So jumping back on in, the dentistry piece, again, as before, please don't hesitate to throw questions in as we go. But what we wanted to highlight in this particular example is how we can bring in one example of a specialist object like chairs, manage those in a way that's centralized, with the key thing here again being any central schedulers or anyone who's concerned with looking at a holistic viewpoint of all of this information can see all of this. This isn't being managed in external systems. It's being able to be managed in a single system, and users who are scheduling, even if they're scheduling in the schools, have access to the dentistry scheduling mode or modes and are able to then do things in their way without constraining the process for those doing other things like medicine or fine arts or vet science and so on. So once again, just before we do move on, a massive, massive thanks to Martin for sharing his experience here on that. 2 wonderful pieces that we're able to dive into.
And I guess the whole UniMelb team, because I know that for dentistry, there were lots of people that were part of it, and it's definitely part of the rollout post go live. It's one of those ones that was a fair bit of change management. So again, thank you to the work that we've all put in and where you are today. Cool. Nursing, allied health scheduling at ACU. So lots of different institutions do nursing scheduling within Time Edit. We've chosen one, UNE, La Trobe, there's lots of other ones. So the problem for ACU, as we discussed it with them, is they wanted to or need to report on space utilization in a granular way, despite blocking of teaching. So essentially the old way was they'd use a block booking and say to a student, you're busy from this time to this time, but the student would be in between 2 rooms. They'd have an initial half an hour, then they'd go into a practical, and then they'd come out in a different room, and they want to report more granularly on that. And then the students were associated with the timetable through a grouping object, not through an individual student data object. So, it was just more of a challenge for them to get what they wanted out of the old way of doing it. To add some interesting pieces, which I know gave us really fun bits to work through in the implementation, is ACU roll over a lot of what they do. So that obviously is quite different to other institutions, and that sort of added to itself the way that we want this to work from a rollover perspective, and then how to use it now in Time Edit, they roll over themselves. So it's not like we're involved in that at all. They come in and they roll over those reservations and update them and then move from there. So some real sort of challenges that help us to talk about this nursing solution that we came up with them.
Yeah, really good call, Joel. So swinging into it, this is, again, for those that are really familiar with other systems that do things differently. When we talk about week patterns and we talk about the structures that they provide and limitations that are around that, this is what we mean. So in our system, every single thing that we schedule is called a reservation. Every single thing is an individual reservation. Each event is completely discrete, has its own unique identifier, can be surfaced through an integration and so on. But you can then impose structures upon them like week patterns. And that can be part of a process where you create a series of lectures, a series of tutorials, and so on. They're still all individual. The reason that's important in our world is because we don't have that limitation where everything has to be the same within a week pattern. Things can still be grouped together, but they can be separated out, like you see in this example. And so this is critical for the other pieces we saw too, like when we're talking about medicine makeup classes. I got to drop a student in there. I've got to put it in a different room or use a different instructor. This is what makes that tick. Similar for dentistry when we're talking about external staff or spaces and so on. But when we talk about nursing, we're talking about these block bookings that would typically have been done, 6 hours of teaching. How do we accommodate within 6 hours of teaching some variance between the start times or different rooms and these sorts of things? That's traditionally really tough. And so when we spoke to Aidan, really what makes this work is the ability for this to have difference within that structure. So what we're seeing here is an example of how, again, the ACU team would typically do some nursing schedule. We might have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Thursday, Friday, Monday block, 6 hours each day, 3-day blocks. But within those blocks, we're going to have something like an orientation in one room. Then we move to a 1.5 hour session where we do some practical. Then we do a debrief. And then we have a bit of a break. But that's 6 hours of concurrent teaching, so to speak, or total teaching. Now, it's very easy for us to create that structure and then copy that structure across Time Edit. As you can see, we've got a nice little copy feature. And we'll jump into the system there. But there are some pieces that this also enables that are important to talk about. So again, here is what you just saw in that screenshot. Here is, say, a class here for Nursing 001. This is a bit of a schedule for them. If I click on any one of these, see how they all highlight? This is a reservation grouping. So these are all tied together, and this is my structure. It's not just a week pattern, it's actually beyond that. I've got multiple things in here. I've got labs and meetings of different types. I've got classes in different rooms. I've got them starting at different times, as you can see. But what this enables me to do, either from this view or in bulk, if I want to take like a 10-week structure and replicate it for the next 10 years, I can do that too. But I can click any one of these, like this one here, and copy it and drop it in. Let's start it at a different time, just to make it clear. There we go, pop it at a different time. They're now starting at a different time. We don't have these inherent restrictions. Similarly, if you want to look at one like this, I've got this particular meeting that starts on the Tuesday morning up the top, or these ones on the Monday. I can pick any one of these and take that one out of sequence if I need to, while retaining it as part of the group. And of course, if I want to do anything to the group more broadly, say, grab the group and move them all, they all move together. So I'm not limiting myself there either. I get the best of both worlds, and that's what we're talking about there. Now, we have some more list-based tabular views, like our reservation list that our power users will be familiar with. That allows you to do very similar things, and we do these operations in bulk as well from there. So this is just through the graphical interface for those that are new to time. But again, noting here, this particular practical is in CS3. This particular practical is in ChemLab 4. There's no restrictions there. Aidan adding in some extra updates. Thank you. Appreciate that. That's great. Yes, allocating to a 6-block class, but then individual elements sitting behind it. So you get both of those. You can schedule it as a block. That's exactly right. You did talk about that, Aidan. So we could actually schedule this as just a 6-hour block that we then fill with these classes. Absolutely love that, Aidan. Thank you. What this then does is two things. Every single one of these classes has accurate information about where the student will be. You see some shadows. These are actually setup and pack down time for the labs. that are in here. There's padding involved in this, for example. But then from a student's perspective, as far as the timetable, where do I need to be at 8:30? Well, I actually need to be in this specific room, BH104. Then we're going to move to Chem Lab 3 at 9. Then we're going to go back to BH104. If that was BH105, of course, I see that. Right? So there's continuity for the student. There's really accurate data for Aiden and the team to be able to report on that. That's what some of this enables. And then again, we saw the copy functionality allowing the team to be able to take elements of it and replicate that structure. Instead of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I might just take my 6-hour structure, replicate it across to Thursday, Friday, Monday, and then be able to turn that into another cohort and so on. And make differences between that structure if need be. Joel.
I think probably the other bit is we talk a lot at the moment about academic workload, Jordan, and this is probably just the bit to tie this in. What we're looking at here, the ability to tie different classes to who's actually teaching it, using it as a source of truth. You know, there's some institutions out there who are very much leaning into that from a, therefore the data we can get out can be actual and we can use it for academic, you know, workload or compliance. And, you know, if we look at other tools, it can enable workload and other tools within the suite. But this granularity, I think, is, you know, is one of the really cool ones where you can start to say source of truth, it can be here. What do we tie off that? And I know that, you know, Curtin and others have paid a long time their casuals out of a scheduling system, but it's kind of like that with a little bit more flexibility to mean that there's less admin in it.
That's, yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think we're getting some wonderful questions through. Matt, brilliant question. I think Aiden can probably add a bit of how he handles that. But yeah, there you go. Tagging. That's an element. But also you have consistent clash visualization. So if you do it from the reservation list in bulk like you usually would, when you go to put that in the draft, you'll see that it's clashing at that time until you move it and why. Yeah. All right. Yeah, exactly. Love it, Aiden. Thank you kindly. Thanks for jumping in on your story.
Now, we had a question a bit
right.
further up, Jordan, which was when we're still in the medical one, which how do you keep a list of group members updated? And when looking for an alternative spot, do you have in mind reshuffling students from different to find the optimal solution? So I guess the moving is
brilliant question, Maya,
and understanding that. Yeah, I thought the same.
Yeah.
Thought we'd bring it
absolutely.
back.
Yeah, let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. So jumping into the medicine piece again, right? What I've enabled here, Maya, on my interface, if I hover over this, I see all of the things on that particular reservation or all the things on that particular reservation. But what I can do is I can trigger this little button over here, and this is the conflict visualization, which is really useful in the case that we're looking at, say, members of reservations to see what specifically is clashing. So if I hover over this one, if I am looking to schedule this set of things, right? Let's say I'm looking to move this class, right? I'm already in the visual interface seeing where I can or can't put it. So if I try to move it here, it's going to stop me and remind me as to why. But when I hover over any element, it will remind me what it is that's clashing. So here I can see that these specific 4 students are the ones that are clashing. And I can go through and modify those memberships to take a student out of a group or make an exception for that student on the group. So again, if I have the permission that, I can make an exception for that one student and then move that student later, or I can handle that in a number of different ways. But very clearly, if I have these groups that I'm handling and I'm using memberships to drive this, I can then hover over any element of these and see specifically which student. I'm also shown some of this information up here. So in this case, I'm shown that it's this specific student that would clash, and that's why I can't put that class there. So if I was to remove that student from this group, or if I was to make them temporarily excluded from that group, or put them in a subgroup, whatever we do, then I could put that class where this student is on clinical placement, because it doesn't clash with that student anymore. We also have this pin board here where if I wanted to pull the student off this class, I could pull the student off this class, chuck them on the pin board, and then pop them down somewhere else. Aiden, brilliant question that ties very closely into this. If you have core and allocate, our time edit allocate piece, would you be able to move students attached to a class in core and that pushes the change to allocate? Yes, it uses the same membership concept to govern class membership in allocate and core because it's one database. It's all on one database. So if I'm looking at this student group here, for example, I will, of course, see which students are in what group, and if I move them from allocate, or if I reshuffle my students and do an allocation proposal from our allocate interface, then all of the memberships that you see in here are updated appropriately. The memberships themselves are really just containers that we can fill with students. What happens when you place a student on the pinboard? Wow, great question. If I jump in here and I see my student and I pop them on this pinboard, what will happen is that this will go see-through because this specific student is no longer on here. I'm actually taking them out of that grouping. In the allocate context, Kelly, if I was to remove a student from that grouping, then they would no longer be what I might see. For example, in this class is I might see that I have 4 students on this class that are part of this group, right? And if I remove that student, put them on the pinboard, I now have 3 students in this class. But in core, where I'm working, that student's still on the pinboard because I'm going to take them and put them somewhere else. The pinboard's a temporary holding space while I'm, as a scheduler, managing individual students, juggling things around. Yeah. But if you are using the allocate piece that we have, and those that may have been in our previous webinars will have seen that, there's actually a student adjustment interface in there, which allows you in a different kind of graphical interface to take an individual student and move them around different places within the context of their enrollment. This is useful for when you're talking from a hard scheduling perspective, managing individual students within the context of, say, multiple different potential rotations or the full program structure. I just need to move that student somewhere because there's no options. But that only happens when it's all in one database. Brilliant questions coming through. Yes, Suzette, they do. So if you, again, in our original webinar that we did, we used the persona of Amanda, who was actually a module, unit, subject, paper, course, whatever you call them, a convener. And she had 3 courses that she handled, 3 modules that she handled, and she wanted to juggle the students around there. So she was actually manually moving students about, setting up rules to say, I want a maximum of 20% international students in this group, or I want students with this enrollment pathway to fill this group specifically, and so on. So academic staff do have that if you want to give them that flexibility to then set up not just the composition of the groups, but also make amendments at a sort of a broader level, like a cohort level, everyone who's in that module, for example, and then also do the individual student stuff. They don't need to actually set up the groups themselves because once students are in there, they can move things around. So that's where it is. But if need be, they can request, for example, another class because they want students to have another option for a certain reason, or removing classes and so on. That flows through directly in here again because same database. Loving the questions coming through on this one. All right. We will have some extra time for questions. Do not worry for all those that are super, super keen because we're making great time today. So jumping back into our little here, bit of a wrap up. So I might just very quickly hit a couple of pieces here. I'm going to very quickly recap what we saw today from a functional perspective. And then we're going to have a little bit of chat about next steps, about part 2 that will be coming. But while I do that, we would love 2 things from you today, if you're willing. Firstly, what was interesting to you? What was the most interesting thing that you may have seen today? And secondly, we heard a lot of really tough cases at your institutions. We would love, and we'll tell you why in a mo, to hear what the really tough thing that you'd like to see us explore would be. We would really love to know what you would like to see. So just briefly while I do that, quick recap. We saw memberships, where we were able to do that granular student control. We could have individual students on reservations alongside groups of students governed by their program structures. We could have students moving between those groups. And we talked a little bit about the pinboard there at the end, where we can take them out and drop them in and do some modeling. So you've got real control over this. You're not just limited to having one student group per week pattern that has to be consistent all the way throughout. Then we talked about reservation template. Really granular rule sets for what sits underneath everything, pretty much invisibly, until the user switches into the mode that is relevant to them, that they're allowed to do based on permissions, and starts to use the things that are relevant to them. It means chairs for dentistry schedulers, and it means external staff like surgeons for medical schedulers. It means musical instruments for fine arts, but keep that one under your hat. And then we talked a little bit about individual reservations, which is the piece that sits underneath, again, all of this from a functional perspective, making it possible to break up some of those weak patterns, break up and create variants, do things that are out of sequence if needed, have lots of flexibility, but retaining the structures that you had originally and retaining all of the benefits of having those structures. If I want to move things together, or if I want to see that things are kept together, that sequencing is there, that a student gets a timetable where everything shows, then I get all of that without having to worry about the fact that if I've created an additional group or moved a time and so on, that my student no longer gets their timetable. That just doesn't happen. With the key thing of the message today being really just sort of DNA features of time edit. These are some of the underlying pieces that sit right within. The only reason that these are impactful is because we've worked with a number of very, very clever teams with very clever individuals who have leveraged them in very clever ways. Last piece from me, unless there's questions at the end. I mentioned about tough scheduling context that people might want to see. I see Aiden's jumped in there. I'd love to gather that because those of you that might have been in our What's Up TE earlier in the year, we asked you what you wanted to see. You all screamed reporting. So, of course, we did it. And we want to do the same thing again. So, we have an idea for a part 2 where we're going to look at fine arts and music. We'd like to look at international delivery and complex time zones. I also see there's been lots of information in here about things like vet science. I'd love some confirmation from the audience there on what you'd love to see, because we are very happy to take requests, though if there is no overriding push to any direction, we'll run across with this one here, and we're aiming for June for that one. So just so you know what you can look forward to. So please do chuck those in the chat. But Joel, on to you before we jump to questions. Or Bob.
Dr. Zanotta,
Yeah,
I think you're looking for, Jordan.
Dr. Zanotta, yeah. This is
sorry,
below,
Doctor.
Yeah, this is just a couple of the upcoming webinars that we have. So whip out your phones if you're interested in joining us. We've got our What's Up TE webinar coming up, which is a quarterly update focusing on what we've sort of achieved or delivered in the last quarter, and then what's on the roadmap for the upcoming quarter. And then, as Jordan mentioned, part 2 of Mastering Complex Scheduling, looking at the fine arts and complex time zones, but very keen to get your feedback, so we may be able to add in a couple of extra topics as well. But no, I think it's been such a great session. You guys have made it even better with your interactions and questions. So thanks everyone. We really hope you got some value out of the session as well.
On mute again, double fine, Jordan. Thank you, everyone.
Wow. Thanks everyone for coming.
A lovely Wednesday, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Suzette, if you're still there, absolutely yes. The past recordings will be up on timeedit.com/webinars as well. So if you're interested in checking those out, you can see those up there as well. And thanks again to everyone for coming.
Thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon.